Thank you for joining us today. The Printing Museum here in Houston, Texas, has recently undertaken a reimagining of its permanent collection exhibition galleries to be more inclusive of the diverse cultures and individuals that have contributed to the development and spread of printing. We are pleased to be able to offer a graduate research fellowship to Anna White, who has been helping us in this endeavor. Anna is currently enrolled in the Master of Archives and Records Administration program at San Jose State University and has a Bachelor of Arts in Art History from Northwestern University. Please join me in welcoming her now as I hand it off to Anna to tell you more about her research into how to redress gaps within the Printing Museum's permanent exhibition to create a more accurate and inclusive image of the world of print.
Thank you very much. Hello all, my name is Anna, as Adrian introduced me. And today I will be talking about ways in which the museum is going to be redressing its permanent collection. So start off, we have as a topic the idea of narrative, voice, and history. So whose history we are highlighting within the collection. And to start off, I want to talk about how histories are constructed. There's a saying, histories get told by the winners. And this is part true and very part false. Histories get told by everyone. It's access to resources, power, influence that maintains and preserves certain histories over others and works to erase or omit the narratives of others. And so two of those aspects are preservation and presentation. Collection, maintenance, these are kind of the sought out factors of history establishment. So when an individual or an institution goes about seeking objects for their pleasure or for their education or just to own, this is where objects transfer ownership and they become collated into a single source. And then it is the burden of that individual or institution to present that material. So you may have all the most wonderful stories in the world, but if you don't share them, which comes in the form of curation or access to your repository, these histories still remain kind of biased towards whatever the curator or organization at hand tends to preference. Wealth, politics, religion, these are all major influencers in our society. And when we look at history, we can't just say, oh, this was wonderful because this individual was associated with this powerful movement. For example, if we want to look at religion and we say this was an incredible object associated with this movement, let's say the Protestant Reformation in our current collection. What ends up happening is you have a preference for the types of influences as opposed to independent voices. So again, moving towards the Printing Museum, what does this look like in our museum? We have a collection, we have methods of curation and presenting access. The problem with any institution is that it cannot be an infinite resource. It's impossible, it's very competitive. You have a finite access to resources, a finite access to objects, and a finite amount of space to present these objects. But that shouldn't be the end all be all reasoning for why you can't attempt to present a holistic perspective. The Printing Museum makes its mission to be a site of community engagement, artistic production, and to celebrate individual voices and narratives. It has at its fingertips a wonderful repository that is the result of 40 years of being in a local institution in Houston. But what makes the Printing Museum interesting is that it's not trying to just be a repository, an archive, or a catalog. Education, interaction is a major focus of the institution. You could tell a comprehensive printing history by simply talking about the technological innovations and never touch individual voices. And that's really not what the Printing Museum is about. The intersection of cultural moments, individual moments, technologies, that's what the Printing Museum wants to focus on. So a timeline for development of printing might look something like the initial human language, writing systems, development of paper. You might have the idea of parchment, various bindings. You could go on and on about the very discrete technological innovations. But like I said, this does not touch the human component, the kind of lives that we want to prioritize as part of the Printing Museum's narrative. There isn't a single technology that can exist in isolation from its environment, from its context, from its users, its makers, its innovators, and often they work in dialogue. So you have at any given moment, not just one phenomenon, but many, and a competition between them, a competition between the individuals, and an interaction, a sharing between the individuals. And where an institution comes in as an important aspect is the ability to contextualize and intercede for objects and individuals and to present them in a proper context so that individuals coming to the museum are not simply barraged with a slew of objects with no idea of what stories they tell and what kinds of contributions they make or what impact they still have and could inspire present individuals to have in their environment. The Printing Museum is also at the hands of individuals. And I've spoken briefly about influence and collection, but to really kind of punch it home, I want to talk about too the idea of preference and bias within a collection. So any collection has within it the opinions and ideas of its makers. And an institution has both the wonderful opportunity and benefit of being an entity that has a tremendous amount of power and influence in cementing those collections as official. And that's kind of a cultural association that we've created for an institution. It shouldn't necessarily be, but it is a tremendous amount of power within a given community to say, this is our opinion and this is what we are presenting to you. And an individual coming into an organization like the Printing Museum can only ever interact with what's on the walls or what we present in our tours or in the wall text. The combination of these elements are what we can provide, but nothing is so powerful as the objects that we select, because this is the base material that we use to interpret, educate, narrate. And so when we look at a collection, giving those objects a really critical lens in terms of like how they operate for the exhibition and the narrative that we want to create is incredibly important, and making sure that it aligns with our mission of highlighting the individuals that we want to, making sure that we aren't participating in the erasure of voices because they are smaller or because they weren't heard before. So individuals who couldn't be influential, not necessarily because they weren't within their distinct communities, but because they weren't billion-dollar corporations, or they weren't benefited by them, or they weren't passed down with presiding organizations like the government or a church. Communities receive, particularly in print and physical media, preservation in an institution is one of the ways that it has the most long-lasting life. So when we want to go back and look at our physical history, we often have the misfortune of relying upon institutions because they are the ones with the resources to have preserved these objects and have selected them to be preserved. But as I said, this is also an opportunity. So an institution can also be a tremendous mover and shaker in making sure that these voices are heard, being incredibly intentional about seeking out voices and narratives and including them within their collection, including them within their public narrative, so that they are an active voice for those people. And there are other ways too, but for the focus of this presentation, we will talk about the ways in which the institution can intercede. So briefly, this is the current exhibition format. There are 4 basic genres within the current exhibition. So as we go through time, it kind of shrinks in terms of geography. So we start with early technologies, Western European developments, American history, and then modern technologies. This then corresponds to our 7 distinct focus areas or galleries within the collection. And this too is part and result of the architecture of the Printing Museum. I'm not sure how many of you have had the pleasure to visit our institution, but it is kind of very maze-like in that we have an abundance of nooks and niches and wonderful pockets. And so the idea of kind of local distinct collections very much fits into the type of space that we have to exhibit. And there are reasons why this pyramid format in terms of delegating areas of focus work. For instance, there is the argument that for a present printmaker today, modern technologies might be more relevant for example, Texas, than they would be across the world. Likewise, American history during a certain point might have had more of an impact here in Texas than it would have across the world at the same point in time. This prioritization, however, also creates gaps in kind of a holistic, what is the world doing in print? So when we look at the gaps this kind of pyramid formation creates, there's a lack of continuity. You begin with the world. Early technologies embraces kind of any and every type of innovation that happened regarding early visual communication, as well as early print technologies. So we have the facsimile of the Rosetta Stone, we have early block printing, we have palm scrolls, we have manuscript culture represented. And this is kind of a diverse picking from around the world. But when you come closer to the present, you lose that continuity. You start narrowing in. And what this does is a kind of unconscious association between the past and a global history, and the present and a local history. In terms of diversity, by this I mean within each distinct category, the lack of inclusion of minority voices within that area. For example, when we look at American history, so roughly 1750 through to 1900, there aren't a lot of voices outside of some pretty dominant trends. And so we have powerful historical documents, and these are important in terms of establishing our important government cultural legacies. However, what it also does is present a history of powerful people and powerful movements in America. And so what it lacks is is a moment outside of the powerful institutions to discuss what else is going on. What are the voices that aren't being heard as loudly? So again, continuity, unconscious associations with the timeline. Past is kind of follows almost an Oriental dichotomy. Everything non-European, so Asian, African, Indigenous, is associated with the past because that's kind of the last moment within the collection that we have for those voices. And then we have a lack of contextual comparison. So by omitting these voices, we then have the problem of a lack of dialogue. We can't talk about why they're different, how they're similar, or in terms of inventions, if it was invented in one location, where was it popular? Who were the people outside of a singular locality who are maximizing on this? Who are the people who are really championing these technologies in their communities and transforming their realities? Similarly, diversity. You have a kind of inclination within the permanent exhibit to present a timeline of powerful people and powerful institutions instead of a comprehensive or kind of totality of what is available. You have this kind of whittling down to voices who might be heard elsewhere and might be heavily represented elsewhere. And we kind of haven't yet on include these are the people who outside of those measures of influence could be analyzed for how print affected their lives too. And so what I want to talk about too is what that means for the exhibition. So to begin with, when we move beyond the legacies of power and influence as evaluators for objects to be included in the location, in the on location in the permanent exhibit. You have a digression from the kinds of resources that provide that same material. So what I mean by this is if you have, per se, the most popular printer of a given location, that popularity reflects who had money to access their materials. How is this popularity evaluated? How were they collected? Were they really that popular then? Or is it who was making sure that they were preserved and presented? And so context helps reorganize some of these things. But to really diversify a collection, you have to, in addition, look outside of these types of categories for inclusion. So when we look at the exhibit, part of the consideration I took when I looked at the current exhibition is that we are going to be shrinking space. And so adding is not the most effective way to challenge what we have on the walls. And so I really wanted to look at what we did have and be really critical of what kind of labor it was doing for the exhibition. What are the kinds of elements it provides? So I really divided them in between technological advancements and individual stories. What I love about kind of this movement towards a anecdote as opposed to central narratives is it helps to minimize the amount of erasure that happens when you say this is the history of a location, of a time, of a people, by saying here are the technological inventions, and then let me tell you the stories of individuals who used them. You kind of bring it back down to that personal level, which each of these objects should be viewed at. Because while some objects might have been loaned more mobility and more presence by their owners, by their makers, they too deserve their context to say, this is the story of this maker, this is the story of this object, this is why it was able to make its presence known. But that is still a story within the world of print. The world of print can't be told as a central narrative because you force upon it the idea of similitude. Like there isn't a way to say everyone everywhere had the same types of evolutions, same types of preferences between technologies, or even the same types of trends in terms of use and association between technologies and material. So what one person might use a technology for in one community could be totally different in another. And by saying, this is the singular point in time, and this is the most effective use, or this is the most prevalent moment of this object, this technology, you end the possibility of also talking about the ways in which it started as a personal, an individual moment. And individual moments inform realities and trends, but they are a conglomeration of individual moments. So I have really loved that we are able to kind of shift away from the idea of general history timelines or trying to establish a comprehensive history in one moment. or in one narrative, and instead said, we can do this labor by saying or by showing individual moments as individual moments and giving their context. So what this ends up looking like in terms of the layout is less pocketing, less here is a trend, the beginning, middle, and end arc of a section in time. And you kind of equalize all narratives by putting them next to each other. And part of this too, again, is architecture. So the idea of a central, very fluid floor plan is going to play a part in helping make sure that anecdotes are treated with the kind of same weight within the collection. Additionally, we're going to be introducing some more interactive elements to really kind of cement some of the more fun elements of the collection that shouldn't really just be on the wall as wall text and wall, because not only is this kind of limiting in terms of like who can gain the most from having the long enough attention span or literacy in that language to obtain that information from a lengthy wall text. But by going ahead and having a moment, interpersonal moment, where you can obtain the information differently. An example of this would be the importance of paper, the spread and diffusion of paper. We have so many different kinds of paper, and we have so many different kinds of like predecessors. So that's parchment, papyrus, and these material realities ended up playing such an important part in the development of print culture. The amount of labor required to produce any one of these materials influences how much you have at any given moment to produce a body of text, a visual work, whatever it is you choose to do. But so these types of knowledge can't be truly understood simply from reading, oh, there were many types of paper, here are the different types, here's the timeline of when they were the most popular and where they were made available first. Part of it too is saying, see how hard it was to make papyrus. It takes 7 days. Yes, it was wonderfully abundant. And yes, a tree could give you, a single plant, excuse me, could give you some 40 sheets. But is it really flexible? What can you do with it? How hard is it to bind it? These kinds of things then affect book culture and how easy it is to transmit the objects as opposed to oral culture. So did these cultures who used papyrus heavily, were they also relying upon other forms of communication to augment? Yes, they were. But the point being that some of these material realities, they don't make the most sense through a wall panel or a infographic. And so using that example, one of the interactive elements that we really wanted to introduce was a kind of physical encyclopedia of the different types of materials, so that individuals could come and feel what the differences were and why it was important that you could bleach certain papers. Why is it important that it's super flexible? Why is it important that this area didn't have those plants and they had to import or rely upon trade to ascertain paper? South Africa is one of the wonderful examples, Eastern and South Africa, because they relied heavily upon in the mid 14 to 1600s Italian paper as opposed to Eastern Chinese or Turkish papers, simply because of the kinds of trade and financial mobilities that were at play at the time. But anyways, I'm going on a rant about paper. But this is to say that I'm really looking forward to some of the types of ways we're redressing some of the most basic problems that are granted to an institution. The problem of presentation, and especially the burden of being an official presentation or the resource, the ways in which collection and presentation often interact. So the burden of saying, yes, this is what we have, but is this what we need to show? Is it easy sometimes to show 200 magazines because we have them in wonderful condition? Yes, but it's our duty as an educational institution to say, but what does that do for you as the visitor? And what does it do for our narrative when we propose it in that way? To really make sure that the narrative that we present, the one that you have to interpret as a visitor, whether or not you get to be on a tour with our lovely docents, we want to make sure that you can really follow what we value and what we believe to be important elements to introduce. And I really haven't talked about contemporary voices, and this is also because we have two wonderful spaces for both our in-house makers and our temporary exhibition space, which has done a tremendous labor in terms of seeking out and showing our contemporary makers. And this also makes sure that in our kind of seasonal exhibition that we're continuing to highlight local features and local makers. And this concludes my presentation. But before I do, I wanted to thank very much my four advisors, Professor Kong, Professor Reed, Professor Yarborough, and Professor Yaksa, and then also my wonderful, wonderful, wonderful helpmates within the printing institution, Brian Hodge and Adrian O'Donnell. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, we greatly appreciate all the hard work and research that you've done. And thank you for your time today as well. We have some extra time today too. If anybody else had any questions for Anna or comments or anything they'd like to say, we've got some time for that. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Anna, I know you said that acquisitions is not necessarily a great idea for this institution in particular, but were you going to make any suggestions for acquisitions that could help diversify the story that's being told?
Yes.
And maybe, yeah.
Yes. Particularly because of the immediacy of the move. I know it's like the kind of secondary intervention that's going to happen. So the first intervention is make space and take the opportunity that's being provided by the move to say, okay, all the things that are on display that don't need to be anymore, let's go ahead and move them into storage, archive them properly, and do that now. And then I have made various suggestions based on the areas that I've identified as kind of being not present within the collection. So that's Indigenous voices, particularly in Texas, and more broadly in North America. There are wonderful, wonderful early periodicals that also do some interesting labor to fight and kind of educate Indigenous communities in their fight against discrimination by the government in terms of like spreading knowledge about policies, new treaties that are incumbent, trying to go ahead and say, okay, this is what we need to do. So there are areas, of course, of improvement. We have I want to call it our minority corner, but we have the two kind of infographics in that nook, and then we have only two women maker objects highlighted. And in addition to being really unfortunate, they also are only in relation to women's suffrage, which also kind of creates the misunderstanding that that was the only reason they ever got involved in printing, which isn't true. There was a legacy before and there was a legacy after. Minorities in their protest movement, and I mean minority in any kind of underrepresented group, in their protest moment can't be the only time that we see them. We can't only look at African Americans when they're fighting discrimination. We can't only find queer makers when they're trying to promote visibility for anti-discrimination or trans women being murdered. So to give those makers who have existed throughout history, and this is kind of what I mean by both diversity and continuity, it can't be just a moment. We have to say, okay, there are moments throughout history when they have been there. Were they influential? Maybe not, but it also probably wasn't their fault. And so turning away from the most notable women's rights maker during women's suffrage to say, women have been in print culture for a really long time. There are other types of print culture in America than the cis white male narrative that often gets promoted as the narrative of American print history. Yes, those were incredibly influential, but it was a result of their social mobility, social power, that they got to be kind of that successful. And so again, kind of going back to the anecdotes, I am really looking forward to something that I've been in conversation with Brian about, and Adrian frequently, is the idea of highlighting individuals and narratives that we may not have access to their objects, but giving them space within the collection to be acknowledged in their stories, so that we don't necessarily have the opportunity to do a close looking at anything made by Ibrahim Bouteflika, but like we can also say, oh, look at how wonderful this moment in Ottoman printing was in the late kind of 19th century. What did this do for them? Why is this here? And we can also say, turn around and say, okay, a local maker, Hovida Idar. So you have her and you have her story. Why wasn't she more well known? What did she do? What are her accomplishments? And also what are the challenges that she kind of had to redress? And what does that say about the makers that we do have and the objects that we do have in the collection? So long answer, yes. But the idea too is we might not have to wait until we have an object to show to highlight these individuals. Having them in the collection isn't oh, I really want a first edition of their first paper and such and such and such. We can do that now and do it in our permanent collection. And we don't have to have an object to do it.
Right. To that end, so what are some of the other alternatives or recommendations that you might have, like you were saying, because we wouldn't have all the objects, but I
Right.
think we, as a museum and an institution, the printing museum's not adverse to facsimiles because we already have a lot of those in our permanent collection and on display. I mean, obviously, like the Gutenberg Bible, we don't have a Gutenberg Bible, but we are able to have access to a facsimile. So were there some other examples like that, Anna, or imagery?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm thinking of off the top of my head are the sheeping tablets, circa around second, third century, which is thought to be an early precursor to block printing. So public monument engraved, and we have evidence that individuals would go up, ink the tablet, put out the paper, take the copy home. And so this is an interesting kind of movement away from the idea of, oh, let's place the, and so this is just an interesting dialogue in terms of technologies. And there's no way you would want a 10-foot tall monument facsimile in the printing museum, but an image which is easily obtained through like permissions of other institutions, particularly other educational institutions. You can have an image of your object at play that you want to demonstrate, and it takes just the same amount of wall space to have kind of an image of an object as it does to have the object, usually less in terms of 3D space.
Thanks. Yeah, and Anna also touched on the fact that the museum will be moving, so that is also a challenge, but also an opportunity to coincide with kind of reimagining the permanent collections, because we have been in situ for 40 years. And, I think as we all find with museums that have had long lives, things remain status quo for a while, and you just kind of never really think about addressing things. So we appreciate Anna also coming and doing this additional research, which really is going to help round out our collection and just make it more thoughtful, which is what we really hope to aim to do.
I have another question. So reappropriation of objects is a really important topic right now. And we see Germany and France in particular returning objects that are not culturally their own, or they don't have great records of how they came to be. And I was just wondering, was that at all a part of one of the things that you looked at when you looked through our collection? And is that also maybe a really good argument for facsimiles, and to be able to promote dialogues without actually appropriating objects that maybe are not ours to appropriate?
Yes, I completely agree with the argument for facsimile, particularly because although we have a wonderful repository, we aren't really focused on object research. And so the argument for obtaining actual objects is relatively weak for our institution. We're not a site where outside of kind of a brief interaction in our reading area, that a researcher could really kind of capitalize on having an actual object. Instead, what we, as you kind of said, is the ways in which we interact with the object, primarily through the permanent exhibition or individual requests, could be as easily serviced with a facsimile. It didn't play as much of a role in my revision of the permanent exhibit. It did play a role in the types of objects that I wanted to pursue. So for example, birch bark writings is one of the early indigenous practices, and manuscript culture in North America. And so we could do that locally. We could make birch bark paper, and we could technically write on them. Or we could be intentional and kind of support those makers and seek out the people who do have custody over those objects and say, what is the best way to show this object? Or commission a facsimile by those makers who regularly do so, instead of necessarily like kind of taking on that project ourselves, or attempting to select an object in existence and put it under our kind of ownership.
Did you find anything that you felt should be considered for reappropriation?
I would say most of our objects, and this is regarding kind of, I mean, most of our objects after early communications kind of leaves the kind of usual areas of sketchy appropriation. We don't have a lot of, oh, I wonder how this glorious, let's say, Afghani script circa 1850 got into our collection. We don't have those kinds of objects. The ones that might be at play are significantly older and have a kind of legacy or history that, while it's mostly unconcerning, it would be not necessarily of benefit to anyone to give it back. We have a couple valuable items that are like wonderful features in our early collections, like our Mesopotamian seals, but that isn't something in isolation that I could imagine them hankering to get their hands back on. I imagine they would almost, I imagine they would take them, but they're also relatively commonplace in terms of who has them and where in the world has permission to use them. Yeah, so there are some objects where closer investigation might reveal that at some point it wasn't in someone's best interest to send it here. But that is honestly beyond our records and beyond our research capabilities currently to seek out those people who we would wish to reimburse. I'm thinking too of like the Dharani scroll and the Dharani pagoda. For all intents and purposes, it's up to standard in terms of how we acquired that object. If before we interacted with that kind of acquisition, it was traded underhandedly, we would have to do some serious sleuthing and probably solicit external help, extensive external help, to research and find those gaps in the object's history.
Thanks. I was just curious. It's an important topic to consider, and
it's a wonderful topic and incredibly relevant, especially when you look at how many institutions are refusing after the request. And that's another thing. I can't imagine the Printing Museum ever saying no. If someone said, by the way, this was mine, we'd be like, oh no. Here. And yeah, so we don't have the current capabilities to kind of make sure everything is spotless. Right now it's sufficient. We know we don't have objects that we intentionally know have owners and do not wish to return.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, well, any other questions? Last call. Nothing in the chat, so I will, I think, wrap up. And oh, we do have one.
Well, yeah, Angela had a comment.
Yes, so let me read that. Thank you for your time and research, Anna. I think the presentation of art in general usually erases the labor of the many individuals it took to produce a piece that is attributed to a single maker. Print is such a collective process and collaborative opportunity. It'd be nice to see a museum change the way such things are labeled.
That is a very interesting point, and I like it. Particularly because that is something that's very common throughout all of art history. The person who signs at the bottom is often not the person who did the significant labor of prepping, sketching, planning, plotting, mixing the materials. And I used to laugh when we would look at kind of masters' works, especially in French studios, and they would say, we can only prove that the master did this detail in this corner. And we'd be like, lazy. But no, it's a wonderful point, and it's true. Studios, printing houses often get overlooked as sites of collaboration and possible influence from people outside of the leadership. And I mean, as we all know from working in teams throughout our lives, it's not possible to attribute every decision to the leader, no matter how many executive decisions they do make in the process. And so, yes, that is something I think that we actually do a pretty good job of in terms of saying, here's the kind of attributed work. And then, by the way, they also had a studio or this is their printing house. So making those kind of concessions throughout the object label, we do a pretty decent job of, I'm trying to think of one that would be horribly contrary to what I just said. Potentially some of the master's works that we have on display, definitely. We don't quite give the range of credit, particularly because we're going, oh my gosh, it's Dürer. So yeah, no, there is area of improvement as well. I'm so glad. Just read your comment, Jacob. Thank you for your presentation. As curator of another printing museum, you have given me several things to think about as we plan our first ever permanent installation. Congratulations, first of all. What a tremendous undertaking. That is going to be so much fun. Yes, I encourage you also to be overwhelmed. As I think is necessary. If you're not overwhelmed, you've missed something. So good luck. I wish you the best, and I hope you have so much fun with it.
Thank you. Our museum's only about 5 years old, so early on it was a collection of physical objects, so now we have to tell a concise narrative with said objects. So we will get there.
Yeah, it's really hard to, I think, it's starting because you look so heavily on what you do have to show. And yes, it's so hard to say, this is what we have and it's really cool. But what narrative do I want to show? And like knowing where those differences lie is something too that this institution has had to look into in terms of, okay, so we have these wonderful, beautiful objects that I cannot imagine anyone not looking at as they pass through the exhibition. They're just such wonderful pieces to show. Does it add that critical labor of presenting either informing what kinds of, does it do something that's already been done in the exhibit is what I'm trying to say. And that's such a hard decision to make, especially when you have objects of very similar nature. I don't know what institution or type of objects that you collect. Type, right? Yes. So yeah, especially when you have such similar objects, it can be really hard to say no to something when it's, the difference is that it's also interesting and as equally engaging and aesthetically pleasing. So best of luck.
Yes, as a historian, there are many things I find interesting, but do those add to the overall narrative of the museum?
Right.
Yeah, whether we're 40 years old or 5 years old, you know, we always have the same challenges of creating those concise narratives and in an interesting way that is inclusive of everybody we want to be inclusive of. Is
Exactly.
those universal challenges.
Which is why I thank you all for hosting this discussion today.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. You know, our pleasure. Thank you, Anna, for all of the hard work. You know, Jacob and anyone else, please feel free to keep in touch. You know, we appreciate our museum colleagues joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for your time. With that, we will sign off. You have a great day. Take care, and thanks so much.